So we're going to continue the conversation about diversity and inclusion and diversity in tech, and not only why it's the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do. And we have, in advance of what promises to be a very provocative Michael Wolff, Anthony Scaramucci session, we have our own share of rock stars here. And I'm going to try to stay out of the way as much of this conversation and hopefully get a good dialogue amongst everybody, because we're all here to hear from you and not from me. But let's jump right in, because we got a big panel and we got a finite amount of time. Janelle, Bethany, and Eric, it's great to see you again, and I'm glad we get to have this conversation in front of the public and our community now. We had a great prep call, and I look forward to digging in. So we're going to do some very brief introductions and a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody put your questions into the chat string. I'll encourage all of my panelists to monitor that as well. And if you see a question you want to just go ahead and answer, you don't need me to prompt you. And let's get a good dialogue going amongst all of you, because we're all here to hear you guys and not me, that's for sure. So Janelle, why don't we just start with you and just a brief introduction, and we'll roll along from there.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Drew, to the entire crew for this incredible opportunity. I'm both honored and humbled. And I hope everyone's staying safe, especially as we're winding down with this COVID pandemic. So I'm currently a senior manager of corporate public relations at BMC Software, and essentially responsible for coordinating public and media relations around our company narrative, particularly initiatives focused on M&A, legal and policy, HR, talent acquisition, corporate social responsibility, and diversity and inclusion. And then just some thoughts of like what's top of the mind right now is, I like to say, talent, timing, tribe, and luck.
I like it. And Janelle, just give us a brief background about what you were doing before you were at BMC.
Yeah, so I actually commissioned in the United States Army as a military police officer after graduating from the U.S. Military Academy back in 2009. And during my 10 plus years in the Army, I oversaw program management in security operations, strategic communications, and public relations. And then I started my transition out of the Army last fall.
That's great. Well, we thank you for your service, and we are humbled by your service. So thanks for joining us. I'm thrilled you're part of this discussion. Eric, I'm going to go to you next, and then Bethany, we're going to go to you, because then we're going to jump into a little bit about BreakLine. But Eric, who are you and what's going on? How are you feeling? And give us a bit of the day in the life of Eric Holm.
So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I have the privilege of leading and working with the People and Spaces team at BMC. My remit spans core HR, HR systems, real estate, also corporate social responsibility, and a couple of other functions here at BMC. Outside of kind of what's top of mind for me, outside of just the great work to do as it relates to people and talent at BMC, over the future. 2020 presented two brand new kind of radically, I think, accelerated areas for us, I think for us and for everybody to really kind of fully kind of lean in. One of those certainly related to COVID, and then the conversation that we just had prior on the panel that was prior to us was thinking about work location and in how we engage with space. And then the other one is, I think, just an acceleration in the thinking of the centrality of diversity and inclusion as a force multiplier in work. And again, I think in both of these areas, there's the opportunity to move what might take decades and that it's taken place in months. So I'm excited to talk about that today, and obviously excited to talk with our partners at BreakLine about it.
That's great. And before we jump into it with Bethany here, Eric, I think it's great that you're combined with the talent and the spaces side of things. Not only in a time where you have offices and physical offices and HR not talking with facilities when you're either building a new office or remodeling, but also now in this virtual work environment. How do people work at home? What is that relationship? I think it's a great combination, and should be the future of people in your role. Bethany, last but not least, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a bit about BreakLine, and then I have a quick follow-up question for you based on the title of our session here.
You bet, Drew. Well, thank you so much for having me. Bethany Coates, founder and CEO of BreakLine Education. You can think of what we do as education for employment. Before founding BreakLine about 5 years ago, I was an assistant dean at Stanford overseeing social impact education for about 10 years. So really thinking deeply about innovation within continuing education, professional education, and how we can work to deeply tie those educational experiences to the outcomes that participants are looking for, which is employment in our case. So absolutely delighted to share more about our work at BreakLine, which is enabled and really only possible because partners like Eric and Janelle and the team at BMC come to the table to support it. So this is really a community-based effort to solve a systemic challenge. And I'm so thrilled to be able to have the conversation. So thanks again, Drew and Eric and Janelle. It's so much fun to engage with you all on this topic today.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And Bethany, tell us a little bit more about BreakLine, get in the weeds a little bit in terms of what exactly it is and how candidates get into BreakLine and who you're serving and helping. And then we'll certainly talk about some real world stories, particularly with Janelle and others.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, so when we started BreakLine 5 years ago, our long-term vision was to ultimately serve 4 communities of people. And we chose these 4 communities because when we looked at the diversity gap within the tech sector, which is where we do most of our work, really the biggest gaps were with veterans, women, people of color, and people with disabilities. We started 5 years ago with a single vertical focused on veterans. Over time, we added additional verticals for women, which we call BreakLine Mavens, and for people of color, which we call BreakLine Apex. People with disabilities is on our product roadmap for the next year or so. You can think of what we do as a continuum. And this is important because the diversity gap in tech is not an isolated issue. It's not an isolated circumstance. It is the outcome of a systemic challenge. And so we bring a systemic solution to it. And it starts with how we find people, Drew, as you said. So we do this in 3 different ways. We have alums like Janelle, who's here today, who refer people to us because our community is very diverse. We have 1,000 BreakLine alums at this point at 50 different companies. The pipeline of referrals is very, very diverse. But we don't want BreakLine to function like a private club. So if you look at the elite educational institutions in the US, that is how they function, unfortunately, where if you're the child of an alum or the child of a donor, you will have many times the chance of getting admitted as your peer who has no connection to that institution. We don't want that at BreakLine. We want the admission to be based on merit. And so as a result, we have a small team internally. They go out and look for folks who they think could be outstanding employees for our partner companies. And then people find us through word of mouth. No matter how they find us, everyone applies. And when we are making those admissions decisions, the key question that we're asking ourselves is, can our team be a great resource to this person? And our filter for that is, do we have a very good chance of helping this person find an exceptional opportunity that's commensurate with their experience and their aptitude and their interests going forward? If the answer is yes, we admit them, start working with them in a very high touch capacity. We spend about 60 hours with every BreakLine candidate across about 3 months in a whole range of different types of classes and sessions that we co-create with our partners like BMC. Once our candidates are ready, we start making curated matches. And when a candidate is hired by one of our partner companies, then they belong to our alumni community. And they are members of that community for life. So this is a long-term, long-standing relationship. And in constructing our work this way, Drew, we are addressing a couple of key issues that build together to that diversity gap. It's education, it's access, and it's community. And we solve those issues together with our partners. So that's our approach.
That's great. Thank you for that background. It's such a great organization. So Janelle and Eric, I'm going to come at you both with 2-part questions that are going to be similar. So I apologize for throwing 2-part questions at you already. But Janelle, so let me start with you, and Eric, you'll have the same question. You have a little bit of time to think about it. The question, Janelle, is how did you find BreakLine, or how did they find you, and how did that relationship start? And maybe just talk a little bit about the education. And then if you can anecdotally, in your experiences in corporate and even in the military, we know it's the right thing to do. We know it's the smart thing to do, but can you maybe give some real world examples? You were sitting in a meeting or there was a project you were on and you know that the, a diverse team really made a difference in sort of X kind of way. Like something was different, and because it was different, it really, accelerated the innovation, or, was the project was more effective. So sort of a two-part question. How'd you get with BreakLine? And then, give us some real world experiences about how diverse teams have made a difference in your experiences.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that question. So I actually found out about BreakLine word of mouth through my sister. She's also a BreakLine alum. She actually was in the military.
Legacy already.
Yeah. She transitioned from the military a year before I did. And I reached out to her, where do I begin? There's so many programs available to veterans, amazing programs. You just need to find the right one for you. And my sister was like, I think BreakLine's going to be a perfect fit once you apply and get accepted. And I was like, okay, great. So applied early this January, I was accepted. And like Bethany said, 60 hours. I think maybe I got a little extra credit because you feel like you're studying, absolutely, like you're transitioning, preparing for, just to learn a different language. And so that's kind of how I found out about BreakLine. And then I was accepted, started the program. BreakLine reached out to me about 2 months into the program saying, hey, BMC has expressed interest. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And the interview process with BMC just made me feel like, I felt like so comfortable being myself, and that this company wanted me for my experience, my value. And I just love the overall culture of BMC. So that's my experience with the BreakLine process in a nutshell. If I could think about a time where diversity and inclusion resonated, it would have to be my second overseas tour to West Africa in support of Operation United Assistance to help combat the Ebola pandemic. And typically a unit in the military gets anywhere from 6 months to 18 months to prepare for an overseas tour. But the unit that I was in, we were given 2 weeks to pack up 4,000 people, ship them, prepare their families, send all of their equipment over. The list goes on, to go through and be located in 4 different countries throughout Western Africa. Wow. And in order to do this, it required what we call the military decision-making process. And it was a cross-functional team of probably 50 individuals from all walks of life, all branches in the Army, gender diversity was there. And most importantly, cognitive diversity was there. And we locked ourselves in a room for 48 hours and war gamed during this decision-making process so that we could provide our brigade commander, who's equivalent to a CEO of like a mid-sized company, provide her with, hey, this is how we plan to go to West Africa in 2 weeks, bring everything we have. Oh, and by the way, make sure that all the soldiers are safe and trained, no one gets sick. We help the world resolve this problem, and then we come back home safely. And we would not have been able to come up with that plan in 2 days if it wasn't for the diversity, the experience that all these people brought, whether they deployed or not before. It was just amazing to see all these different people in one room crank out this amazing plan that proved to be a success.
That's great. Janelle, I'm going to just a quick follow-up question with you here on the fly, because I think it's such an interesting story you just told. Does the military, while the military has a relatively, checkered past, I suppose, with diversity on a lot of different fronts, what you just talked about, that's a great specific anecdotal story, but does the military have a specific sort of philosophy from your perspective that, allowed that situation to happen? And is it as simple as, look, we don't really care about your skin color or your gender. We got a job to do, and let's go do it. And is it as simple as that? And that just reinforces sort of that belief and that philosophy? Or are there other specific things that the military does in terms of training or other things that created that environment where no one was thinking about race or gender or anything, and you'll get the job done?
So personally, I don't think it is so simple as you're as good as your job. But I think what's important is the military from day one, you're put in an environment with people that are from all these walks of life that you would never have imagined. And you live with them during basic training for weeks, months at a time, train with them. You're forced to go through some serious hardships with each other. And I think because of that, everyone proves through that environment, everyone proves like, this is who I am as a person. and then slowly the where you're from and what music you listen to and what which God you pray to just sort of kind of fades to the background. It creates an environment, it's forced, and it creates an environment where we accept everyone for what they bring to the table. And part of what they bring to the table is where they come from.
That's great. Great story. Thank you for that. So Eric, same sort of back to the two-part question and how you came across Bethany and BreakLine, and then I'm sure you've had multiple experiences, both anecdotal and probably direct at BMC in terms of where diversity really made a difference.
Yeah, I'll start with, I think our first event with Bethany and team was February of 2017. So it's about 3 years ago. And one of our central kind of tenets and pillars to kind of our community outreach was with veterans. So I think that was the introduction. And that just naturally blossomed into what we found to be this conduit to this amazing pool of talent. And if you think about it, and I will certainly point to what you just experienced in hearing Janelle talk and speak to her experience and her background. This is why we fell in love with the program. These are the kind of individuals that were built to succeed in novel environments where they had to do problem solving, where it was about collaboration, where it was coming together and innovating to kind of form solutions. And that's been our experience to the degree that you fast forward to today, and we are eager partners with BreakLine as they expand, their business model, certainly whether it's through Apex or whether it's through Mavens. And again, it is one of the secret sauces, I think, of as you do talent work, is figuring out who are the right partners that help you devise some of these solutions. Sometimes you get lucky. You run across and you kind of bump into it, and it's like you're tailor-made for one another. And regardless of whether that's the case or you want to say that it was super intentional, it doesn't really matter. The output and the outcome is what's important. And I would go back and I would share, I think when I think about work that we do as tiger teams in the company, where you're pulling together, you've got a problem, and by its very nature, the solution that you're trying to drive is one that requires multiple perspectives. It is tailor-made for problems to be solved ideally by a diverse group. We talk a lot about kind of what's the research and kind of what drives this. I think the proof is actually on the ground. Is if you've lived through it, you see the decision making, the more natural innovation, ultimately the better outcomes that are driven by diverse teams. And I think we've seen that time again, whether the problem is how do you pipeline customers in a COVID environment to how do you just innovate on innovating? I mean, you name it, and I think it's tailor-made as a proof point.
And Eric, any thoughts in terms of once you have these great people in the door and across the organization on different teams, once they're there, do you have any thoughts or advice, best practices in terms of things that happen internally, whether it's driven by sort of HR, for lack of a better term, I hate to use HR, or even business leaders who are working with you? I love Janelle's story about in the military, everyone's there and you're just all there together from all walks of life. I love that. Can you recreate that internally within an organization if there are people out there listening saying, how do I get going with this?
I think the answer is yes, but not by accident, and it just doesn't happen by itself. I think the discussions we've had in the past, this is intentional. It's got to be something about, because at the nature of so many of the issues of inclusion. So it's one thing to find great talent and to bring great talent, but they won't stay if this isn't a place, or this company, whether it's BMC or anywhere else, is a place where they can be authentically who they are, whatever form of authenticity that takes and whatever that representation is. And again, you can only do that if there's some sweat equity here in terms of being very intentionally holding up a mirror and looking for where there's bias. And I think that's a challenge for every organization, because I think, and I think Bethany's shared these thoughts in the past. We've had these conversations. It is somewhat natural to go towards the homogenous, right? In terms of how you do things. And to build an inclusive environment is to operate very much, slow down the approach, if you will, and push in the opposite direction. Pause to create that opportunity for inclusion and authenticity.
I agree. And the part, well, I was just about to say, you gave me a sneak peek, a little bit of research, which I didn't know was going to be 60 slides. But that's okay. I got to geek out on it, and it's like diversity was so important. Why don't we have more of it? And I kind of wanted to lead in there. And Eric, what you were talking about, part of the first 10 pages here about how homogeneous sort of cultures create comfort and all these types of things. But in terms of it doesn't bring that diversity of opinion. So Bethany, can you dig in a little bit into beyond the we know it's important, we know it's right, we know it's the smart thing to do, and maybe even dig in a little data from your time at Stanford and at BreakLine about real down in the weeds sort of evidence about how diverse teams really do drive innovation, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, Drew. And I also, as I get started, wanted to really give Eric and his team more credit than he's claiming for himself. I think the words he used were, it just sort of naturally blossomed, which to me sounds like luck. This team dug in, and it's Eric, it's Jason Andrew, the CRO, Sar Schwartz, the CMO, Bill Miller, president of Z Solutions, Carly Field, who runs recruiting. I mean, the senior team decided that they were going to make diversity and inclusion a priority. And they devoted their time and their budget to make it happen. And that is the type of intentionality, when Eric used that word, that is what's so crucial. This will not happen without intentionality. So you can't expect to do things the way that you've always done them and come out with a different answer. It's going to be the same unless you take a hard right. And it starts at the top with leadership. I had shared, Drew, the slides with you. Those were compiled by a Stanford professor, Maggie Neal, who's done a lot of research recently around diversity and inclusion. And she had really interesting insights around women-led teams, women CEOs, for example. And I think looking at the major differences in business performance that come when you have diverse teams, this is not a question anymore. The data is there. I'm happy to share those slides with anyone who's interested after the conversation. It's not ambiguous. It is very clear. You drive revenue, you drive profitability, you drive employee engagement when you have diverse teams. When I can see someone who looks like me, who reminds me of myself succeeding at this company, it builds my confidence. It helps me be the best version of myself, which is what every single employer needs right now in order for us to achieve our goals. So because the data is there, there's no reason not to go after this, but going after it implies that it's an active pursuit of this goal. And I think what's really, really crucial is that it has to be quantifiable. It has to be measurable. It has to be incentivized. And we have to come back to those goals and to our performance against those goals and treat it just like any other business objective. And if we're failing, there are, outcomes associated with that. And if we're succeeding, there are outcomes associated with that. But if we don't put a stake in the ground about what we're trying to achieve, and then really be disciplined about making sure we're following through on those goals and objectives, we're not going to get there. So that's why the intentionality, the role modeling from the top, the devotion of budget, resources, time that we see from BMC, this is best practice when it comes to actually creating change for diverse and inclusive organizations. I wanted to share an anecdote from Janelle. I hope you won't mind, Janelle, but we spoke a couple of weeks ago on a different topic, and I was saying, how's it going? What's the latest? And she said, Bethany, I have one word to describe my experience at BMC. She said, blessed. And that what she was describing is not just her experience as a candidate being interviewed and sort of considering a role, but as an employee, as a teammate, as someone who's pursuing a career at this company, feeling welcomed, feeling at home. And so the role modeling and the leadership goes beyond that interviewing and hiring decision, as Eric talked about. It really is a long-term decision that makes such a difference in the end.
That's great. We've got about 4 minutes where time is zipping by, and there's a question that came in that I'd like any of you to jump in on. And it's, how can technology help this process as well? And Bethany, whether you might use AI in screening, or Eric, in terms of the technology that you may use to help this, I think this is probably a little bit more along the lines of person to person and hand to hand combat in a very good way. But where is technology maybe helping or potentially doing a disservice to this in any kind of a way. I don't know. This is on the fly, so anyone can jump in on that.
I mean, I'll say a couple of things. I think that it's positive and negative. I mean, so it's probably not a surprise. I think that you hear me say that. I think one of the places where it's a benefit is, the technology and insights and analytics. So if you think about things that are just at the advent or kind of in getting into the mainstream, it can help companies determine where this unconscious bias actually exists, right? That type of insight can tell you, hey, we think we're doing X, but unwittingly, we may be leading down a different direction. And that insight translates into something that you can then action on. So I think that's important. I think technology may be a way to connect communities in a way that didn't happen or couldn't happen before. On the other side, my one of the concerns that I have is that people believe that things like AI somehow become the silver bullet, and it certainly, as it relates to selection,
right.
that somehow or another, whoever programmed the AI,
not if there's bias built in the AI, right? Yeah, exactly.
So there has to be a blend. A hybrid type of approach. So I think it's both. It's predominantly a boon, but again, it's got to be intentionality in terms of how you're using the technology for your targeted end.
Yeah. Bethany, any thoughts on technology and whether you guys use it in any kind of a way, or are you fearful of it a little bit?
I'm not fearful of it. When I was thinking about that question, I was thinking about the industry as a whole, which I think has been a leader in terms of recognizing that this is a challenge and recognizing that it's solvable at the same time, and actually beginning to take those steps that are required to make sure that these opportunities, which are so fabulous, are accessible to everyone who has earned them. So I think in many ways, technology can be a leader for other industries. I also think that there's some really important innovations, some of which have been accelerated by COVID, like the idea that you can work from anywhere and be really productive and contribute in enormous ways to teams. And that democratizes access further to these opportunities. If I can work from Detroit or from Atlanta or from Chicago and still be part of this amazing industry, that's a really, really wonderful new step forward that the tech sector is embracing, and hopefully other industries will follow.
Agree.
That's great. Bethany, real quick, or Eric or Janelle at all, there was a question that came in about ageism, and I know that's probably not a vertical you could take on. That's quite a large vertical, but any thoughts on ageism, any of you, 30 seconds or less here, because we are at time, but and even addressing that.
Yeah, here's I guess what I'd say. We're fortunate. We've got multiple generational cohorts at BMC. Mainframe is a core part of our success. It is an amazing source of pride for our company, and we have amazing talent that is very, very experienced, and they are as critical to the bottom line as millennial and Gen Z folks that you're hiring in at kind of a beginning of career. Those cohorts are an and for success, not an either or for success.
Right.
I can speak only, I guess, mostly for my experience, but I've seen it in the almost 17 years that I've been at the company as a true source of pride.
That's great. So we have to wrap here, but before we wrap, I don't want to turn this into a Janelle embarrassment episode. But not only did she serve, she is a Bronze Star award winner. So I mean, I'm only more humbled now, so a round of applause. And thank you again for your service. I don't know if I've talked to many Bronze Star folks, so a highlight of my day. A highlight of my day, to be sure. So Bethany,
sure.
Eric, Janelle, thanks so much. This was a great conversation. I wish we could go on further, and I'll welcome David to come on in and transition us into the next session. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.